All right. Good evening, star nerds. How's everybody doing? Glad to see you back on the Astro Imaging channel on this lovely Sunday night. It is a little bit cloudy where I'm at, so I'm not imaging tonight, which is big sad. But I think my rig out at Starfront is imaging, which is great. So you can discuss in the chat like you usually do what the weather is like where you're at. But let's do some opening announcements. So first of all, welcome back. And tonight we have Warren Keller with us, which is always really exciting when he comes and joins. And he's going to talk about the multitude of stretching tools available in PixInsight and the different things they do, different ways they operate, and including some of the new ones that have come out. And that's been a pretty hot topic lately. Stretching is really the #1 thing that takes your image from being like, hey, look, a space thing, to holy crap, this is amazing. Stretching is probably the most important part of the process, at least in my opinion. So we're excited to have him to talk about that tonight. The next episode, which is February 1st, remember we're on a twice monthly schedule now, we have Mike Cranfield coming back to talk about there's a pixel math UI that I have not played with yet, but I want to find out more about what this is, and we'll probably make pixel math less scary to people is what I'm hoping, and potentially bring some other ease of use for those of us who are less afraid of pixel math. So we'll get him on soon. And then we have a pretty horrifically open schedule. It's just this gaping maw of a schedule. So we always ask for speakers every week, and I know it's like a kind of a big hurdle to feel like, oh, am I good enough to be on this show? The answer is yes, you are good enough to be on this show, because we need everybody from the super experienced Warren Kellers and Ron Bretchers and Adam Blocks down to the folks who have been not doing this for quite as long, who can really do some of the, especially the like introductory kind of stuff for other new astrophotographers. I think we could use a little more of the kind of new level content on here, as well as all the advanced awesome stuff that we have on here too. So on our website, theastroimagingchannel.org, you can hit the contact us button, and that email goes out to a couple of us, and one of us will get back to you, and we'll see if we can get you on the show. Or if you have any friends, you can tell us, you can point us their direction, say, hey, they talked about this in my astronomy club a few weeks ago, or I know they're good at this particular thing, or planetary imager. They're imaged a really cool nebula recently. Send us their contact info as well, and we can reach out. So before we move on with the show, Eric wanted to make a couple of comments as well. So go ahead, Eric.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, I don't know. Some of you may see my images on AstroBin. I've been on there since I weighed 20 pounds less, actually. And probably have about 1,500 images. We've had, I think 3 different telescopes. The latest one is a 20N CDK, which I've been running myself for the past 2 3/4 years. But, personal matters have kind of cropped up. And I'd like to see a small group of people kind of take over and be responsible for running the CDK. And if you're interested in that in any way, or have a friend, or always thought you'd like to get to arguably the best imaging site in the United States, there might be some argument there, but I think we can safely say that we get about 200 plus good imaging nights a year, and can get some fantastic images with a 20N CDK. If you know of anyone, or you'd like to do it yourself or organize a group, let me know. You can contact me through the Astro Imaging channel. Just send a message here, or if you can find me on AstroBin, you can send me a DM there, and we can have a discussion. I remember when I first got to the dark side and got away from imaging in my backyard, it was truly a revelation. I know Molly has gone from imaging in her backyard to Starfront, and your whole imaging life changes when you're at one of those sites. So again, if you're interested, contact me, let me know, and we can have a chat about it. Thanks, Molly.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, the difference is so vast. It's not even funny. Like you go to dark sky sites, you go to star parties, you get a 5-hour exposure, and it's nice. But when you can spend 30 hours on a target under Bortle 1 skies, like the rest of my data just doesn't look as attractive to process anymore. So it's a total game changer. I'm probably going to end up putting a second telescope out at Starfront in the not too distant future.
One more thing. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I forgot to mention the system is totally automated. You put in your targets, you collect your data, you sleep at night. And in the morning, it all arrives there nicely for you. Anyway, sorry, Mari, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so I think with all of that, I think we're ready to go ahead and turn it over to Warren. So pop back in the room here.
Okay, that's scary. You caught me messing around here. Good evening, everyone. But it was image related, so it's okay.
All right.
Good evening. It's great to be back on TAIC with my friends and my really old friend, not old, but an old friend, Alex, for sure. Let me share my screen with you tonight. We'll go here. And hopefully you can see that okay. Everybody see that good? Yep.
Good.
Okay. So we were talking before the fact, and I think Molly may have mentioned when we were live on the air that new stretching options are coming at us fast and furious. And really for me, and I think for most, the dust really hasn't settled yet. What is going to be my go-to? And typically, if you're an experienced imager, that you want to have more than one spice in the spice cabinet, because there may not be that one tool that works perfectly all the time. And so having the options, I think, is a good thing. I don't know how many beginners, newbies we might have tonight. Molly, you might chime in if we need to talk or should talk about the histogram in general, what stretching is, or we want to just get into tools and newer tools.
I think a little refresher, if it is relatively quick, I think would be good. Also, real quick, if you could hit that hide button on that meet.google.com thing. Yeah, perfect.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of let you know what we're looking at here, and I'm going to open the screen transfer function. And if you notice that green vertical line there in the view identifier tab tells us that there's an active auto stretch. And if I track that particular view and turn that off, we can see that that's a linear image, right? So we talk about linearity and non-linear images. And what are we talking about? Well, linearity is that, the things that we shoot, amazingly enough, are so dim and are so close together in degrees of brightness, steps of gray, that all we're going to see when it gets read off the camera and when we pull it into a program like PixInsight is that just the cores of the very brightest stars. And rather miraculously, we do some pretty aggressive pixel manipulation to wind up with these beautiful images. If I were to open a process, which by the way has been the workhorse, I've always termed it, of delinearization, of stretching, histogram transformation, and whether we're using it or not, it's still the place that we'll turn to get a read on what the histogram looks like. What is a histogram? It's a graph, a graphic representation of the distribution of pixels in an image. It's not looking at anything right now. I'm going to go to the view selector and I'm going to choose that linear nebula. Linear nebula. I don't know how it got such an exciting name there, but this is the preview up at the top window, and at the bottom we have the state of current affairs. Look at that little spike off to the left. Can you see that? I'll zoom in a little bit with my mouse wheel. Can you see that? But in its natural state, that's it. And what it's telling us is that all of those pixels, except maybe the brightest highlights that are kind of hanging out along this flat line right now, all the important stuff, all the meat and potatoes are all jammed together in that very dim place where there's no contrast, because again, all the levels of gray are so very close. This is a color image, so we can see a red, a green, and a blue peak there. But why is it called stretching? It's probably one of the best, metaphoric kind of expressions we could come up with, because the idea is when we apply some type of a transfer function, a midtones transfer function, or some type of curve, so that the input is not the same as the output. The output is being raised from the original input brightness value. And so even if I just kind of willy-nilly draw this MTF, this midtones transfer function, you can see that peak of the histogram is moving to the right. And that's stretching, right? That's the original point. And we're doing this non-linear type of curve to brighten things up, to get that peak more spread out and out of the shadows and more into the midtones, where it can be seen not only in a program like PixInsight, but in a graphics editor like Photoshop, or when you're going to post it on a website, right? That's what we need to do. And what we would see too is that the graph, the peak would also get wider. It would get spread out, not just move to the right, but get fatter and spread out. If you were to look at a terrestrial photo, you would see a very, very different histogram where those pixel values are spread all through the graph. So that's the idea of linear versus non-linear. Now this STF, screen transfer function, I call it the flashlight. And it only is capable of a temporary stretch, right? We're not manipulating, changing that data at all when we do that, but we're getting a beautiful view on the universe with our little flashlight or trouble light. But that's actually a non-linear temporary stretch. So although it's temporary, it's non-linear. How do we know that? Because linear stretches, and I'm just going to do this so I don't lose my stretch. I'm going to grab a highlight slider. Linear would brighten all levels of gray at the same time. And if you've been in other astronomical graphics processing, Astro, Art, Maxim DL, things that weren't really meant for post-processing, but did a decent job of it, they could only present the data in this way, in a linear way. Again, all levels of gray, and that includes the red, green, and blue channels, because intrinsically they're gray. They get mapped to a tricolor image. They're all getting brightened equally, but we don't want that. We want non-linear type of changes where the shadows stay darker than the midtones. We want the highlights to not get clipped, blown out, lost, so that they're colorless or they lose their features. So it's a little background in why it's called stretching, linear versus non-linear, what the STF does, and what histogram transformation does. And it's important to note, again, the flashlight can't perform permanent changes to the image, but this histogram transformation can, and that's what it's really there for. And you probably know the old trick where you could transfer a curve over to histogram transformation. You could refine it a little bit with the black point and the midtones point, and then finally apply that permanently. But it's important to know that there's no guesswork. Whatever you see in the STF, you're going to see in the permanently stretched version of the image with histogram transformation. Why? Because they both use the identical MTF, midtones transfer function. And for years, it's been the great thing to have. It does a wonderful job. But you notice that, and compare it real quickly to these images on the right, and I'll talk about those in a second. It's got a MTF, it's got a histogram transformation sort of look. Note that the stars are kind of more present than we might like. They've got a lot of hot contrast in them, and they're fairly colorless. Histogram transformation doesn't necessarily bleach or clip out color information, but it doesn't do anything to really increase it or hold it, because more than anything, that MTF stretch is a lightness, luminosity sort of a stretch. So it doesn't matter for a grayscale image, but for color, again, you're not going to get as much saturation as you might like, and those stars are going to be kind of over present. Now, there's a million different ways to address that. And up until very recently, I didn't want to do that. Up until very recently, if you were watching Warren process, he would do something. Oh, I'm talking about myself in the third person, like somebody else I know. I would do maybe an initial stretch where I really accommodated the stars alone. Now, some folks will pull their stars out linearly before the stretch, and that's fine too. For me, I've been at it a long time, so I feel like it's a little bit of double work. But I would make an initial stretch, maybe using the STF, to make sure those stars aren't any more stretched than they need to be, losing any more color than they need to. Then I'd apply that permanent stretch with histogram transformation, do a couple of things perhaps, like an extra hit of noise reduction after the delinearization, and then I would pull the stars out. And once the stars were out, then I could go for a really aggressive type stretch perhaps in the background. But again, that's all kind of changing now with the new options that we have for stretching. The reason I started here and pulled up these different versions is because I want you to know, and it's an expression I've used a lot over the years in presentations, it's not the plane, it's the pilot. I remember the first time a guy said that to me. I said, well, what does that mean? He says, I don't know. I said, no, there's something there. It's not the plane, it's the pilot. It's not the tool, it's you, the artist. A good pilot can fly any plane pretty much with a little bit of training. And you, if you have that artistic vision, you can use any platform, any tool to get to the same place from a visual standpoint. But is it being done as efficiently, as correctly as well? Probably not. So let's look at a few things, and I tried to match the looks of all these things with the various tools that we'll see tonight. First one up here is Statistical Stretch by Franklin Marek at SETI Astro, a free script for PixInsight. You probably know about adding repositories of scripts or individual scripts. Frank's got a whole suite and actually now has an SAS SETI Astro suite that's available that I think is a commercial product. This is the version 1. When I first put the project together, I used the current version of Statistical Stretch, and it did a really nice job. But let's take a look at the latest version that he just put out, and this is Statistical Stretch 2.0.7. And so again, tremendous color saturation. This is the first example of what's called a Luma stretch, L-U-M-A. And frankly, I wasn't really familiar with that term, nor was I familiar with the HDTV standard of 709, I believe it is, which is what these newer tools are using rather than an sRGB type of color space. These Luma stretchers decouple the chrominance, the color information, from the intensity, the grayscale brightness. They stretch that, the brightness, and they upscale, they rescale the color information, and that's what gives us this tremendous color saturation that we just thought, you know, with years of histogram transformation under our belt, that this is the way it was, that we had to build color saturation along the way because it wasn't there. Well, it turns out it is there, and if it's rescaled, it really makes itself known. So that's Statistical Stretch over there. Verilux is an interesting case in point. And again, you know, each one of these tools has tunable features that you can vary things. But again, I was kind of trying to go for that pretty similar look across all the images. So Verilux is some interesting math. It's also a Luma stretch, and it was developed by a guy named Riccardo Paterniti. He developed it for Cyril, which is a free software. Sounds very powerful. Frankly, as an official PixInsight ambassador, it kind of looks like Cyril pretty openly steals from PixInsight. And I'm sure Juan isn't particularly happy about that, but it sounds like a tremendous effort. And Cyril uses Python scripts, whereas PixInsight still relies on JavaScript. Apparently, JavaScript is more limiting for developers, and the Python can be more powerful. I'm not a coder, can't speak any more to that. But Verilux is really good too. Again, does a Luma stretch, so you can get a tremendous amount of color saturation. I remember back in high school, my senior year teacher, I really loved him. He was very big on the Romantic poets, and he was also big on Greek tragedy. And in ancient Greek tragedy, there was this concept of hamartia, right, which was the tragic flaw that every hero had, and it was what brought them down. So I don't want to get that dramatic, but almost every one of these tools has this hamartia, this little Achilles heel that kind of makes them less than perfect. And the problem with Verilux right now is that it doesn't have a real-time preview, and we'll see that. But so Paterniti came up with the math, but this very mysterious guy named Killer Chow, that nobody can seem to find Killer Chow, he started porting all this stuff to PixInsight JavaScripts, and for the first couple of days, you were getting these updates of VHS Suite and VHS porting, and I was really upset about that because V comes after U, and we're so used to going into the utilities scripts for many of them, the utilities submenu for so many of the scripts, and I'm like, no, I don't want that down there. But anyway, other than the fact that it doesn't have the real-time preview, and I don't know if Killer Chow is going to come back with a preview. It would sure be nice to have that. Then we'll move to MAS, right? Multiscale Adaptive Stretch. This is the new offering directly from the P team, directly from PixInsight, Pleiades Astrophoto, and apparently MAS, Multiscale Adaptive, is the way that P team member Vicente Perez has always stretched his images, and I don't know how he did it without having this interface. But it's an interesting idea. It's a little. I was on the test team. Ron, my partner, Breacher, was on the test team. But it's a little bit of a black box to us in that we don't know what the stretch is. It's not an MTF, and I don't know. I don't think it's a Luma stretch. But that none of that verbiage was ever used. And I really should just go back at least to Vicente and say, you know, what is the algorithm? What is the curve? But the idea is that it uses a bit of multiscale wavelet processing to recover contrast in the small scales. You've got color saturation controls. You've got stretching controls. And as I mentioned to some of the TAIC team before, one thing it doesn't accommodate is unlinked stretches. So if you're doing tricolor narrowband and you're used to unlinking your channels before a histogram transformation stretch, which helps us control that hot green of the hydrogen alpha, you can't do that here. So there are accommodations. You could do linear fitting beforehand, but MAS is expecting really a calibrated broadband image. Does have a real-time preview, and that of course is very helpful. And then in the flurry of all this new stuff, you know, I was doing tutorials for our Masters of PixInsight.com website, and I'll just pull that up real quickly. Come visit us. It's myself, Ron Breacher, Pete Prue. We are Masters of PixInsight.com. We really want to make you the master of PixInsight, and we've got a ton of free videos and data a PixInsight primer to get you started in the program, navigating what all the stuff does. And then we've got subscription models and one-off tutorials, both live webinars and scripted stuff. But while I was doing tutorials for my PixInsight Today series for MOP, and then also working with Telescope Live, doing a series on stretching, by the way, something made me go back in time, and let's go to intensity transformations, where most of the delinearizers, brighteners, color saturating tools live. And I just decided to revisit ArcSinh H stretch, because I remembered that a lot of folks used to talk about NASA's FITS Liberator plugin. It was a standalone, and then it was a Photoshop plugin. A lot of people swore by that ArcSinh H algorithm for stretching in that particular program. And Mark Shelley had instituted it for PixInsight a while back. I tested it when I was writing the book inside PixInsight, but for some reason I just didn't pay it a lot of attention. And man, it's freaking good, and it's very easy to use. And so I'm thinking, and forgive me if I'm a little, pinging off the walls tonight, because again, it is all new stuff and there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to pull up another project real quickly. Going to go to Open Recent, right? Project Files, and it's my Galaxy project on the desktop. So wait a second for that. Take a sip of water. And by the way, Molly and all, I'm open to taking questions if somebody has something pressing at any particular juncture or tool or whatever. So
Warren, we just keep track. We're watching YouTube. If something comes up and it looks like a reasonable break in your presentation, we'll try to give you the question.
Because you're professionals. So same thing, here's the linear HT. Let me open STF and track that view, right? So a linear image, but once again, what you see is what you get. That's what your histogram transformation is going to look like, whether you build it from scratch with HT or you transfer a STF over to it. And it's classic, right? It's contrasty, it's good, but the stars are, a bit colorless, a bit too present, especially for today's style. And I would say there's definitely been a shift in style. And we would really have to use some of the HDR brightness compression tools in PixInsight, either HDRMT, Russ Croman's CCHDRMT, Create HDR Image by the Graxpert folks. Lots of options today, but we would want to compress that core to reveal some of that detail down there. And also we would have a heck of a lot of pumping up of color saturation to do to make a beautiful, pretty picture. But look at some of the other ones. And again, they're in a little bit different order. Here's Verilux, here's ArcSinh H, here's Statistical Stretch, here's Multiscale Adaptive Stretch. And my point to make here is that so far it seems to me like nebulosity is a simpler problem. When you get a field like this, and the Leo triplet is a classic galaxy grouping, because each one of those galaxies, 65, 66, 36, 28, they're so different in nature, right? You have kind of a classic spiral, you have a very unusual, beautiful guy up here with his robin's egg blue in it, and then you've got this edge-on hamburger galaxy. And I noticed, and yeah, you could, to a small degree, fine-tune, but look how different each result is. So I'm going to pull up this one. Oops. Go there. and we'll go here, and we'll go here, and we'll go here. And they're all really different, aren't they? I haven't studied them enough to talk to you about how they're different, but this one has got some really good detail, a little bit lower in contrast. This one has got sharp contrast, more color saturation, as does this one, ArcSinh H. They're all pretty significantly different, and that makes it more difficult when you're trying to use that one tool to get that perfect stretch for all of them. Nothing would prevent us from using pixel math to blend 2 or even 3 results if we thought there were advantages in more than one view. Let's look at 3628. Very compressed, nice detail. Brighter still, great detail, more colorful. Similar, the most contrast yet, maybe the most color saturation yet. And so a processor could kind of drive oneself a little bit crazy. I mentioned to the guys before we got on the air that I'm not a person that really loves choice. I'm a minimalist, and choice can really overwhelm me, and in a lot of areas of my life. And in processing, even though I do want the best results possible, and for instance, I've become accustomed to trying, I should say, 3 or 4 different gradient removal tools, trying 1 or 2 different color calibration tools. But now, again, it's like, well, here you go, Warren. Now there's 4 or 5 ways to go. And don't forget the concept, again, of pulling stars out, which I was initially really against, because again, as an experienced processor of 25 years, I'm like, you're just making extra work for yourself. If you know how to stretch, and this was even before the couple of new latest tools, you can accommodate the stars and you can accommodate the objects of interest as well. I'll just mention another really nice script by Frank at SETI Astro is Star Stretch. And so for folks that were pulling their stars out, SXT, Star Exterminator, will maintain the current stretch if you don't touch it, but you could stretch your stars with Star Stretch and even add color saturation at that early point with that tool. So I just mentioned that. So I think before we go back to the Nebula project, which will actually monkey with some of the tools, I'm going to pull one more up. And that is grayscale contrast. So it just so happened I was one of our students. I can't even really call him a student anymore at Masters of PixInsight. We do have a Facebook group called MOP VIP, and he's been to about every webinar we've ever had. But he's really, as a couple of other people, Timothy Martin, and you know what, Molly, he might be a great presenter. And Tom Peter, these guys have just become top notch imagers, and of course they bowed to us and say that we've done we're responsible for most of their education, but they've become tremendous artists, and that's really the bottom line. And he had done this NGC 1333 by telescope live data. Actually, it's Bernard Miller's data, and I'm like, oh, I gotta have that. And so I got it, and it's just been a bear. But while I've been experimenting, as I've said, with all these new tools, with stretching and stuff, I spent a little bit of time with the luminance, and I just went ahead as an experiment and pulled out the stars. And these are all nonlinear, right? You see there's no green line, so we know they are as they are. There's no temporary auto stretch on them. And my gosh, you're hard pressed to really spot any difference at all. So MAS, multiscale adaptive stretch, statistical stretch version 2, and I believe this is histogram transformation. How can I find that out? Right-click identifier tab, load history explorer, and sure enough, yeah, a couple of iterations of of HT, but very, very, very similar. And by the way, something I hadn't mentioned is Verilux cannot work with a grayscale image, so it's color only. And as good as I said old ArcSinh H stretch is, it doesn't do so well with a grayscale image. So more about color. And of course, a lot of you are shooting one-shot color, I'll bet. And a lot of us are abandoning the necessity of luminance, which is kind of a holdover from the days of CCD imaging, especially with slow focal ratios. So it's very much about color today. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight, pun intended, into, at least in this case, when the stars aren't involved and color isn't involved, how incredibly similar these are. Okay, so I will open the other project back open, the nebula. Honestly, I know you guys are always pretty liberal about letting us do commercials. I think the thing that we do at Masters of PixInsight about better than anybody is what I call context and chronology, what to do, when to do it. There are some great YouTubers, there are some okay YouTubers, there are some really bad YouTubers that don't need to turn on a screen recorder ever again. But even the best stuff, it's hard to create that workflow, that what to do, when to do it. Of course, as you go along, once you've done the preliminary steps, it gets artful, it gets freer. You don't necessarily have to do this now or that now, but those early steps, it's really nice to know what you're doing. Okay, so I am going to minimize everybody here, or shade, as we say in PixInsight speak. Gotta love PixInsight speak. And these are probably going to annoy me, so let me just kind of park them. And as I said, I'm a minimalist. I'm a little bit obsessive, and I'm very neat workspace, and everything's got to be just so. And I drive myself pretty crazy, but it seems to work. And some of my students will say, "Oh no, it works. That's good. I like that." So here's our linear image. Let's expand it. Let's open STF. So I think we've kind of covered enough on the histogram transformation, right? I think we saw enough action between STF and HT. So let's move to the onboard native new tool, which is going to be the multiscale adaptive. And this is my tried and true trusty icon set that I'm always updating. It's my chronological set because it really steps through pretty chronologically. I'm glad to provide these for our viewers for the asking. Probably do it through the Astro Imaging channel, and I'll provide them. But as you probably know, icons are great because they keep you out of the menus, and they store your own personal settings. And again, you can set them up pretty chronologically. So let's turn off the temporary auto stretch, and let's open a real-time preview multiscale adaptive. And in this case, I'm going to reset the tool globally. You'll see no changes, meaning for now, my icon has the factory default settings because it seems to start at a really good point. It's fully documented, which is nice. A lot of folks complain about PI's documentation. That's probably why I sold so many copies of a book that unfortunately is a little bit outdated now. But that's fully documented by Eduardo Radici. And so target background by default is 0.15. That directly relates to the STF. Let's control click the radioactive icon, And you'll notice in the STF auto stretch dialog that you have a target background and you have shadows clipping. You also have a boost clipping factor and a boost background, because you guys probably know that there's a regular auto stretch, a boosted auto stretch. Of course, you can adjust manually by dragging the sliders in STF, but this is a way to kind of dial in good starter background levels. So when you do turn on the auto stretch, they're more in the ballpark of where you need to be for your data. And you can save that. You can also reset it at any time. So that's kind of useful. But again, target background relates directly to this. And so that looks pretty good to me. Maybe we could try 0.12, which is where I often am with regard to the STF. I think I kind of like that 0.15. The aggressiveness is really that clipping, that clipping factor. And clipping, we didn't really talk about that when we're talking about the histogram, but let me pull this up real quick. So we know that shadows are on the left. If you're even a Photoshop person, think of levels. You know, shadows is on the left, highlights are on the right, and midtones are in the middle. And in a typical astronomical astrophotograph histogram, when the black point gets raised to the toe where the data actually starts, that's a good thing. We've dialed out loss of contrast, dead information until that data really starts to rise up. But if we cut into that histogram, we are literally clipping. We are cutting off information. So if I were to apply this permanently, all of this stuff would be gone, all that dim information. And the same goes true for highlights. If we were ever to touch the highlights slider, we could risk clipping, discarding information on the high end. So this is really that clipping factor, that raising of the black point. And it seems to be really good at that default of 0.7. Higher values is more aggressive clipping. It will be more contrasty. It will be darker in the background, but again, you may be clipping good information. Dynamic range compression. This 0.4 default is really good. If you push it higher, the contrast is going to be softer in the highlights. So let's pull it here. I think you see those stars get a little bit more like a histogram transformation look to them. Go back to the default, and if I go higher, see how soft they get. They almost disappear, don't they? Sound like Mr. Rogers. Sure they do. Go back to 0.4. At least I cracked somebody up myself. So there's that. And then we turn to contrast recovery. So Vicent says that it's the loss of contrast in the small scales, again, talking wavelet speak here, that needs to be improved for a better stretch. They say in the materials to uncheck both contrast recovery and color saturation. And damn, doesn't that look exactly like what we saw from HT, histogram transformation? Yes, it does. All right, so contrast recovery. It's not really said in the materials, but it makes sense to me when I preview the large scale component that I want to dial out the small scales. And most of the stars are gone, but I might up that to 8. And it jumped to 9, and it tends, at least on my machine, to kind of jump twice. So I'm going to put an 8 in there and enter it, and just get rid of those smaller scale details, leaving the larger scales. Once we've established that, you're free to adjust these further. And if we go back in on some stars, and they really are beautiful stars. Let's watch the pores. If we go 7, we've got less compression there, more compression, and more compression yet. So I think I'd go with 8. The default was 7. And then the easier part, we move to color saturation. So again, I don't know that this is a Luma stretch because it doesn't really talk about preservation. It talks about saturation, about boosting. So I don't really think that it's the rescaling of a Luma stretch, but I'm going to ask eventually. The amount is self-explanatory. More is more color saturation. And boost is interesting. The default is in the middle. Moving left will be saturation to the more saturated regions. So for the most colorful result, we want to put it in the less saturated regions as well. So that's kind of a max color boost right there.
Warren, it's a little hard to see something like the color boost and the color. Could we zoom in and maybe you could get a better view of that?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Our magnifier updates. Natural voices? No, I don't think so. Okay, here it is. All right. So here's the multiscale adaptive stretch window, right? Target background. If I move my cursor, I'm afraid it's going to jump away. Target background, right? The overall brightness, the aggressiveness of the black point, the clipping factor, dynamic range compression, softer as we go higher, harsher.
I'm sorry, I probably didn't state that. I was assuming that we're looking at the preview on the left. Could you zoom in on that so we could see some of those color effects and contrast effects?
Well, hang on. I can't use the magnifier for that really.
Yeah, just use the preview within the preview. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I did with the stars, but let's go.
Yeah, I like that. So we can see those changes in your color.
Go back to 0.5. And let's take this down 0.52. So there's where we are. That's pushing the overall amount. And then boost lower. It's going to hit the most saturated areas and not put a lot into the least saturated areas. And this is going to put more color into everything. So that's the full on. And you'll notice very smartly that it has a built-in internal lightness mask. So brighter, stronger signal is going to get hit with the color while protecting weaker, dimmer areas from getting color saturated. So we'll apply that. It takes a little bit, and apparently the most of the time is spent in the contrast recovery. So if you wanted to run faster, you can uncheck contrast recovery. By the way, the instructions, and it was said on the forum thread for the beta testers, don't use it for HDR type images like M42. It's not going to do a particularly good job. And then I think it always is smart with any of these tools to revisit histogram transformation, because none of these tools give us a real-time interface to see what's happening to the histogram. And with a real-time preview open, really, although we're getting a quote of a ridiculous amount of pixels being clipped in the shadows, over like 3,000 pixels or more, that histogram tells me that there really isn't much going on before that. I will say that I think we're going to have to all kind of rethink the look of the histogram with most of these tools, because it seems that when you do that, if you can see on that left edge, well, it's actually easier to see just without magnifying, that there's a little bit of a red and some colors climbing the left edge of that histogram, which tells us that it's clipping. And surely that's darker than I would want to go. And this is telling us we're clipping 0.1% of the pixels. So again, textbook would say that's where the data starts, but I think we're going to have to all get a little flexible and rethink the look of a post-stretched histogram. But if you see something obvious, you can close that gap with the shadow slider. You could also pump up the midtones a little bit if you wanted to. Probably something better left until...
Warren, before you close that, so once you've done that initial non-linearization and you see that you have a lot of kind of dead space to the left of the histogram and you move that over, that moves the peak. And I see you've done something that I do, is I try to match the peak on the top and the bottom when I adjust that left and center slider. Is that what you're doing too, or is that just a coincidence?
Yeah, not really. I'm just right now, Eric, talking about, raising a black point. And that's kind of a classic spot for a histogram peak to sit right in the middle of that first rectangle, sometimes behind it, certainly in those Leo trio type of images we saw before, when you just have a few bright blobs and mostly a dark background, that peak will be way behind here. But that's pretty close. But what my point really was, when I have tested all of these tools, when I bring it up to a point where my eye and my knowledge of the histogram would tell me to bring that black point, it's showing that it's clipping a heck of a lot of pixels. And I can also see that it's climbing that left edge. You see that red and stuff. So I guess what I'm trying to say, and maybe I didn't say it well, is that we're going to have to kind of rethink the way we set a black point if we're using these tools, and kind of just use our sense and our eye to darken that up a little bit. But certainly it's not like an HT, traditional histogram transformation stretch, where I want to go there to close that gap, because even if I brighten things up again, it's just going to be a little too hot and a little too contrasty. Okay, so that is our HT. Sorry, that is our multi-scale adaptive stretch. And as we'll see, but I don't want to forget to say it, this internal lightness mask to protect, the background from chromatic noise or just additional chromaticism, that's something that you're not going to find in ArcSinh H, in Statistical Stretch, or in Verilux. So that's a little bit of an issue for me. I communicated quite a bit with Frank at SETI Astro. Remember what his tool is called: Statistical Stretch. Frank just feels that it's not in the spirit of a statistical stretch to make an alteration like that, to allow a user to, decide at what threshold color goes or doesn't. As a pretty picture imager, I don't really agree with that, but I'm fairly confident we won't see it in statistical stretch, and maybe not in Verilux either. Okay, moving ahead, let's see. We did that one. Let's go to ArcSinh H. And I said it was easy to use, and you will see that it is. I noticed in my tests over the couple of days that it doesn't do a good job on grayscale. And again, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but narrowband, there's nothing like an unlinked stretch for SHO. And so only histogram transformation and statistical stretch as we'll see, will do that for us. So we open a real-time preview. We click Estimate Black Point, and we've got a coarse and a fine slider here, and we want to dial out any of that clipping that's shown in colors. And if you get to the bottom, it resets and you can slide further. And if it gets difficult, again, just jump up to the coarse slider and do it that way. You do get different results with the Protect Highlights and the Use RGB Working Space. I like to keep this checked. It just looks a bit more contrasty to me. It highlights certain areas that really should be highlighted. This you don't want to use. And then you grab your stretch factor. It's that easy. And sometimes it's as easy as just, sliding all the way up or close to it. You can also do an iterative couple of steps, as we tend to do in PI. Let's apply that. Let's reset the tool. And let's do another black point estimation. I'll use that coarse slider this time. There we go. And stretch a little further. Something like that. I'm going to close the real-time preview. I'll apply that. And let's revisit histogram transformation. And this will be interesting. Now that looks really different than the other, doesn't it? That red is way ahead and it's kind of shrimpy. And so the histograms look rather different between all the different tools. And this one is similar to the last one. Maybe we would just want to set a conservative black point somewhere around there and maybe bring the midtones up a touch or not, and then move on from there. So very easy to use, really nice results, ArcSinh H stretch. And it's been there hiding in intensity transformations from the very beginning. Then I think we'll move on to statistical stretch. I'm going to move back to on this one. I have it as an icon. It's going to be in Frank's SETI Astro menu. Statistical stretch. I've got it here, and this icon, like some scripts, has an interesting behavior. You can't launch it you can't execute it in the global, but you can literally drag and drop the icon and it will open the script. So let's get ourselves a nice big view. First thing I'm going to do is preview refresh. And let me uncheck Luma because I've got my icon stored that way. And that's what I would want. So you'd want that Luma stretch for a broadband image. You wouldn't want it for grayscale. And if you decide to go unlinked, like with narrowband SHO, notice this is grayed out. It does not do a Luma stretch at all. Let's link those channels. Refresh preview down here. And I should add that these images were all prepared in the usual way, gradient removal, color calibration, deconvolution with blur exterminator, noise reduction with noise exterminator. So let's now kick in a Luma stretch. Refresh preview. I think I may have been responsible to getting Frank to add the Luma blend, so we can increase or decrease the amount of saturation that we want. Starting at the top, target median, that sounds very familiar, doesn't it? It's the same thing we talked about in STF. It's the same thing we talked about in multiscale adaptive. It's the overall brightness of the image. Default is 0.25. If you had used the old version, he had some information. In fact, that's still here. You can click the little question mark and he'll give you some information. 0.1 being a good starting point for like those Leo triplet images that we saw. 0.25 for nebula filling the frame. So that looks pretty nice to me. Black point sigma. This is where things get a little bit kludgy for me. The idea is to calculate clipped pixels. And again, in talking to Frank, he wants us to target about 3% clipping. He said that 3% would get us about where we need to be with regards to the black point. But I have found after a lot of testing, and you'll notice there's a little bit of graphical weirdness too, and Frank says it's PI's antiquated graphics. If I go to 2.5 and I measure again, I'm still 0.02. If I go 1.25, getting there, I'm almost at 2% now. With a lot of testing, I've just decided to opt for no black clip. I just think it's easier to set that in HT after the fact than monkey with this for several minutes to get to 3%, only to find that it's really not all that close when I get out of here. So I'm going to say no black clip. And then we have an HDR compression option, which is interesting. I've tested it a little bit. I don't think I love how it works, but the idea is if you do have, unlike this image, if you do have that, and that may be the thing, maybe I didn't test it with an appropriate image, you know, M42, M31, whatever, very bright nuclei, very bright cores. The idea would be to invoke the HDR compression, experiment by refreshing preview with how much HDR compression you want in those bright areas. And then the knee is the higher the amount, the more targeted it will be to those bright areas. And obviously lowering it is going to do more overall compression to some less bright areas. Let's leave that out of the mix for now. We'll see this again in Verilux. I mentioned that Rec 709 is the official color space of HDTV, and that's the preferred mode for the Luma. Normalized range visually doesn't do anything, but if it's checked, then it makes sense to me because we know PixInsight uses a 0 black to 1 white range. It'll just do a small calculation to make sure it's in that normalized range, not exceeding 1.0. Again, in this case, we want a linked stretch. This is a color calibrated image, and the red, the green, and the blue channel need to be linked together. From the earlier version, he's kept this curves boost, and it's just a little bit of a midtones pump. Let's see if we see the difference. Going this route, and it seems like more people will be going this route, which is with stars and trying to get as much accomplished in the initial stretch with regard to color saturation and contrast, that this is, you know, this is kind of a nice way to go. I don't know if you saw it. I saw it, a little bit of bump in contrast in some of these areas. The other thing is, and this is nice, you have an RGB readout. if I float here in the darkest part of the image, I'm kind of in the ballpark. You know, we often go for about a 0.1 value in RGB on a stretched image. It's a little bit high, but I like the way it looks. The preview modes are down here. You can zoom all the way into 1:1. And that goes automatically. You don't have to hit preview refresh. You can drag and drop. You can zoom in and zoom out from here. I'll just return back to 8, zoom out. If we're happy with this, it's time to execute. I leave a little bit of the process console showing because I want to see the progress. And once I see that STF has been disabled, I know that it's finished. You may have run into a problem with, not necessarily Frank's tools, with other scripts where if you errantly click that one extra time while the process is still running, you can really lock the program up. Close that, and brighter background than I should have gone for. Let me mention another thing that, and I'm not sure if it's the nature of JavaScript or the level of competency of the third-party developers that are giving us these wonderful tools, but you'll notice that their previews don't respect the default monitor calibration of your operating system. So it's pretty hard to work with color, especially when things look different, more saturated than they do in the actual PixInsight program, because it's respecting your monitor profile. And in this case, once again, now this is much more conservative, right? I'm all the way up to here before I'm even in 3 figures of clipping, and you don't see really anything climbing the left edge. So I would feel a little bit more confident and comfortable of setting a black point with this one than some of the other ones. And we could have gotten more color saturation out of this too. And so there is our statistical stretch. Let's back up. And we're going to move on to Verilux by Killer Chow. I don't know. He hides very well, Killer Chow. I can't find him anywhere, although I did have a nice conversation with Ricardo, the original Verilux developer. So there it is. It's got this star composer, which has to do with adding stars back into images. And because we have several ways of doing that, it's not something I'm interested in pursuing at the moment. Hypermetric stretch is what we're talking about. I think all these guys are competing for the most exotic sounding name: hyperbolic, hypermetric. You've got some guide here. Click that question mark. It actually displays within the process console. Ready to use unified. And now remember, we're dealing with Italian authors, so some of it might read a little bit odder than an English first language person. There's a scientific manual. I actually tested that and didn't see much difference. But for what we do, and again, I would call myself a pretty picture imager more than anything else, is to use that ready to use unified. You have some options here as well, many more than is available statistical stretch, but the 709 is recommended unless you know your sensor. And again, it's really geared toward to DSLR, to CMOS, and color cameras. And again, this will not work with a grayscale image. It reports an error, not enough channels. Next thing, into the stretch engine, and this is where I would really like to have that preview. You click Auto Calc log D. And I understand that log D actually somewhat relates to GHS, generalized hyperbolic stretch. And if you notice, the log D value changed when I did that. Same deal again, target background. How bright do I want this overall to be? And I'm shooting in the dark, folks. I'm going to go 0.15. If you read the information in the tool tips, this is the intensity of the stretch. Higher is brighter, lower, dimmer. And I think I've been finding that I want to go lower than that. And this Protect B kind of relates to some of the different names, but settings we've seen in a couple others where it's about contrast. Do we want a high value greater than 6 with sharp stars and a more contrasty look, or do we want a softer, gentler look, less contrasty? And of course, as we all know, as image processors, there are many tools for establishing and enhancing contrast after a stretch, right? We have curves transformation, we have local histogram equalization, we have unsharp mask, all about building contrast. So even when you have a low contrast stretch to start, because it has the kind of saturation you want, it has the nice soft look of the stars that you want, there's many ways to enhance that saturation after the fact. Then I'm going to skip Star Core. You can read about that. It controls how quickly saturated colors transition to white. I'm not going to spend all day experimenting with that. The strategy, I really haven't gotten my head around very well. It says you can soften highlights by increasing the strategy. Some of these notes don't quite agree with some of the tool tips. He calls color saturation grip. And other than that, again, being, from Italian, the only thing I could find is, we talk about color fastness, like a dye or a pigment that doesn't fade. They'll use color grip, but it's really not a term that we would use with regard to saturation. Some things I found insanely oversaturated at the default setting of 1.0, but more than usual, it's really not bad. Analyzing clipping, and it tells us that we're safe, and that's to be expected because, as we've seen, none of these really get close to that toe. And then we'll click Process Stretch. And this gives us readings of percentages. Takes a little while. And some of the results have been so good that, yeah, I might be willing to take 2-3 shots at getting it right. And you notice another thing, it doesn't apply to the working view. It creates its own child image, its own view called Verilux Stretch. When I run into stuff like that, because I like to keep a running tab of a history of everything that I've done along the way, I'll just do a little pixel math trick. Reset this, go to my expression editor, choose Verilux Stretch. Okay, and I'm literally just going to overwrite the pixel values of the working image with the Verilux image. So I don't need to create yet another image. I don't need to rescale. I just need to apply. And then I would have the option of keeping this around or not. And I think I'm inclined not to. So let's see where we are. We are hour 15, I believe, almost. hour. Yeah. So I might stop there. See if I missed anything.
Warren, we do have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Marcia wants to know what your general feeling of GHS is and where it fits into all this.
We were discussing that, Marcia.
Yeah, early on,
before,
right?
Yeah, before we went on air. And I've just, I've been back and forth to GHS many times and taking nothing away from its power. It's certainly termed a scalpel. I just feel like 3 or 4 iterations and kind of guesswork on the symmetry points. It's just not quite for me. It's not quite for my partner, Ron Breacher, either. But as I admitted to the TAIC crew, that there have been times that nothing worked as well as GHS, particularly for lifting dust off of a very dark background where the levels of gray are so close together. You can really get very, very fine, very precise curves with it. So I think it's overcomplicated. It's certainly very powerful. And if you like it, stick with it. I don't know that I'll be switching to it anytime.
Well, you've given us a number of choices as to how to stretch an image. And I think it's up to everybody to kind of make a few of their choices and decide when to use one instead of another. So
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's all the questions there are over on the comment section.
There's one little script I'll show real quick. And it's getting back to a histogram transformation path. And I don't know how many folks are aware of it. You probably know the name Hartmut Bornemann. He's done many nice scripts available from the Herbert Walter site. You can add his repository. I tend to keep just ones that I like. And he's got a script called Dlinear. And what it does is it works directly off the STF and eliminates the need to interface with histogram transformation. So if you're going this route, script, utilities, Dlinear, single click, turn off the temporary auto stretch, and there you have a stretched image, which once again, you might want to visit histogram transformation to refine that black point, because that's not something that we know when we're in STF. We have no relation. It's interesting. This is the fattest, widest histogram that I've seen yet from histogram transformation. So it does a nice job in contrast, but again, it really kind of keeps color pretty weak. But that's about what I've got for everybody tonight.
All righty. Yeah, well, I hope everybody enjoyed getting to see all these variety of stretching tools. And Warren, thanks so much for coming on to come share those. Let's see if we get any questions coming up. People don't ask as many questions here as they used to, and it's very sad. Ask more questions.
Maybe they're learning and they just know.
maybe so.
Hey, I wanted to say a little something about what Warren said, that when I asked the question about generalized hyperbolic stretch, he says, oh yeah, we were talking about that beforehand. I got to let everybody out there in listening to this and other programs we do, is that we actually meet a half an hour beforehand to make sure that we've got all the technical aspects worked out. But that usually takes us about 2 minutes. And then we just sit there and shoot the breeze about all this stuff. And so one of the nice things about being, and afterwards, when you guys all go away, we can hang around and talk about other things and argue about what Warren said and stuff like that. So it really is a nice adventure, and it's a real plus if you want to be a presenter, that you get to talk to Eric and Molly and Linda and Jaime and all of us, and share your views. And it's kind of a fun conversation because we're pretty active in astro imaging So I just thought, hey, that's another good reason to be a presenter on the Astro Imaging channel.
You can stop sharing, Warren,
Yeah.
Okay.
and they can see our wonderful faces.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very large.
Warren, I did have one observation when you were talking about multiscale adaptive stretch and how the aggressiveness on that kind of relates to setting the symmetry point in GHS, because you're kind of pushing or deciding where the strongest part of the stretch will be. And it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of analogous in the way the two work, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely take a sixth pass into GHS after talk. I might have, Molly, I may have to hit you up with some
You can watch my video on it.
more advice. Oh, yeah, okay. I definitely will.
Warren,
What's your channel called? Is it just your name?
Astronomy images.
Astronomy. Okay, I think I can remember that.
we hang on after the program, the broadcast, and you're certainly welcome to stay for a few minutes.
May, I'm going to say hi to Gary because I've never met her, and this is as close as I'm going to come to meeting you. It's nice to see you.
Hey, Gary, you made it.
We got another question.
Great.
Got another question. Glassmandan. Hi, I'm
Glassmandan.
curious. Are there other stretching tools that you can mention that you didn't prepare or present? Do you know of any others that are out there that deserve a look? Not that you have to explain them all, but just deserve a look.
GHS would, to best of my knowledge, would be really it at this point. I mean, you have some old things hiding out in the intensity transformations like adaptive stretch and stuff, but and masked stretch. You know, masked stretch was kind of nice when all we had was HT and that can be nice for a low contrast, wide field, soft star look.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. I've
Okay,
used
it's back to you, Molly.
I've used mass stretch here and there back before GHS came out because it kind of understretches things a bit, or at least the way I used it, which was nice for some applications. And yeah, I often understretch things just a little bit so I can give myself some space to work with. Okay, well, barring any more questions coming in, I think we'll say some closing notes. Don't forget the like and subscribe part, which does help get our content out to more people so they can come see all of the awesome astrophotography advice that many, many people over the last 10 plus years have come on to give on this show. So we topped 20,500 subscribers this week. So that's incredible. It's really grown the last couple of years. And that's been really amazing. Yeah, you can see our program schedule on the astroimagingchannel.org. You can also see how empty it is. And so again, you can message us on the contact us button on the astroimagingchannel.org, or you can hit me up directly on Astrobin. I'm on there as Molecule. It's my old, it's a handle I use most other places, but I like it so much I couldn't change it. Or Astronomy Images on Instagram or Facebook. You can shoot me a message over there. If for some reason you're not getting through on the contact us, or you just want to reach out to me directly, you can do that. I think you can, I guess I won't speak for Alex or Eric, but I think they'd also be willing to receive messages from you on Astrobin, or Linda, or Gary. So yeah, if you have a topic you'd like to present, or know somebody who has a topic that might be worth presenting, then please drop us a line. And we're also I'm looking for some assistance on like our social media side. So managing our Facebook page and Instagram, and trying to spread out onto other platforms. So if you're a person who knows a thing or two about social media, you don't have to be an influencer, but if you can figure out Facebook and Instagram, then we'd love to have you come join our team and help keep people informed out there in the social media world of what's going on the channel. Maybe lurk on the forums and post video links and whatnot, because we have I see a lot of people posting about stuff that we have videos on, and if they would just, if they only knew about it. So having somebody to troll around the forums and well, trawl, like not troll, but, run around the forums and post links. That'd be great. All right. With that, thank you, Warren, for coming on, and we will say goodnight. Good night, all.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.